One of my friends got a hold of me one day and informed me that I was going to be going out with him and a handful of other people that night. He told me that I needed a break from everything and a night out with some friends would it be good for me. I agreed, but I told him that I didn't want to talk about Sarah. If I was going to go out, I wanted to focus on just having a good time. He agreed, and he picked me up later that night. We went and met up with this small group, one of which was a woman that I had actually worked with previously at another job. And it didn't take long for her and I to connect. The unfortunate thing about that night was that I ended up doing the one thing that I was adamant about not doing. Everyone wanted to know what had happened between Sarah and I. And after my first drink, yeah, I did that too. I just couldn't stop talking about her and our relationship and just how the whole thing sucked. I didn't get drunk that night, which I was proud of myself for, but when I went to bed later on, I just replayed all of the good memories from my time with Sarah, and it just devastated me. So I gave in. I turned right back to alcohol just to numb everything for me. And I didn't even bother really hiding it anymore. I would have a bottle or two of rum and or sweet tea vodka, which I would just end up mixing with ginger ale, try and make it not seem so bad. Now, the weekends that I had my daughter, I wouldn't touch a drop of alcohol. And to this day, I can proudly say that it is so rare for me to even have a drink that if she is around and I have one, she makes a comment on it almost every time. She's always telling me, Dad, you don't drink alcohol. You drink water or tea or coffee, which is pretty accurate. Yeah, spoiler alert. But when I didn't have her and didn't have to see Sarah, I turned to the booze. The woman from that night, her and I began talking pretty frequently. Her name was Harley, and we grew close amazingly fast. I never viewed her as a rebound. I genuinely and quickly developed feelings for her. And we spent tons of time together just talking, texting, hanging out. And I was getting that creative bug again. I felt like she was some kind of muse for me because we would end up spending time together talking, and then I would just have the drive to write. It was incredible. And I was terrified of having feelings for her, but I didn't deny them. I still wasn't ready to fully open myself to anyone, and luckily she didn't try to force me to. When Sarah and I initially split, before it was finalized by the court, Harley and I ended up spending Valentine's Day together. It was an odd day, but it was fun. And for the most part, I mean, we ended up going and dissecting a heart. And there was this tiny little local museum in Old Town Fort Collins that did this every Valentine's Day. And we thought, why not? I remember thinking that the oddity of what we were doing was exactly what I needed, and that Harley was perhaps exactly the woman I needed to be doing it with to help get me out of my rut. Unfortunately, dissecting that heart was the only thing that we had planned to do that day, And when we were finished, she went back home because she had plans with other friends, and I just really didn't want to be around a lot of people. Harley and I, we had several dates, and we talked several days of the week, and we did the whole boyfriend girlfriend thing. I had told Sarah about her because if it were to develop into anything, Sarah had to know since we had a kid. Sarah asked me at one point if I was falling for Harley, and I told her that I didn't know, and that love seemed extreme. I hadn't thought of love because I didn't want to, but I had to admit that whatever I felt for Harley, it had to be love. I was falling for her. The problem was that Harley, her and I never actually became a couple. We had nothing to keep us committed to each other, and at that time, I was under the impression that we were dating because we constantly went out on typical date activities, minus one, which I didn't really care about. I honestly just really enjoyed the company, and I figured that the physical stuff would eventually and naturally come. We did this stupid version of cowardly dating for a few months, but eventually Harley found herself in a real relationship. I hated him. I resented him, and I hated that he was the guy that she was with. It really it really brought back the feeling from Sarah because Sarah was already seeing someone, and I just wasn't that guy. One night, a small group of us went out to have a few drinks, and there were a few new faces, one of which struck me. Her name was Jenny, and we ended up just spending the whole time that we were out just chatting with one another. It felt natural, and it made me feel good. I forgot everything about Harley and Sarah, and I felt as though Jenny and I could potentially have something real if we pursued anything. Now, the night ended, and I asked Jenny if I could have a ride with her, and she agreed. The whole drive, we just talked like normal people do. Granted, slight slur on my part due to the alcohol, but when she pulled up in front of my place and we were about to say goodbye, I took this deep breath and I asked if I could get her number and maybe we could go out sometime. She nodded and she gave me her number. We said our goodbyes and I went to bed feeling just great that night. Jenny and I ended up chatting a handful of times following that, and she agreed to go on a date with me. I I often shake my head about our date. My nerves were all over the place. I was constantly in my head just telling myself, "Don't fuck this up," which put more pressure on myself than what was necessary. I don't remember most of our conversation at dinner, but I do remember screaming internally. Basically, if you've seen the movie Inside Out, the one about emotions, during our date, panic had taken over the controls and I botched the whole damn thing. Our date ended and I took Jenny home. And after that, we talked for a decent amount of time, but I got stuck in this mentality. Maybe it was a competition or drive to prove something, but I was stuck in this mentality that I had to get a second date locked with Jenny before I went to Seattle. I had this vacation planned to go and see John, and I desperately wanted to be able to say that I was moving on from Sarah. I also convinced myself that if we didn't get a second date, that I would lose my shot with her. We didn't, and I was right. I went on vacation, and after I got back, nothing moved forward with Jenny. I was bummed because I genuinely liked her, but I understood it. And then that revolving door that would become Harley and I it began to spin again because Harley had just broken up with her boyfriend and I was back in it. I was infatuated to a fault with her, and she led me on a chase for a long time. There was one, we all went to this Halloween party where I dressed up as Princess Peach. The pictures are hilarious, let me tell you. And I was determined to finally lock in a relationship with Harley. But then I saw Jenny at that party, and I put all of my attention on her instead. Jenny and I talked a little bit, but I had told myself that I already fucked up any chance with her, so I didn't feel any pressure to impress her. I did enjoy her company, though, and the night ended and the party dispersed. I tried convincing Harley to stay with me, but she just wouldn't have it. I was dropped off at my place, and I went to bed. Christmas time that year was perhaps the dumbest part of the year for me. I knew in my gut that nothing was going to happen with Harley and that I never actually had a shot with her. But I fought that instinct because I had already put in so much energy that I didn't really have, but I put it all into her and into moving on from Sarah. I couldn't let it all be for nothing. So Harley and I, we went to this dinner party with her work. And I had asked a couple of my closest friends to help me pull off something ridiculous. To which they agreed. I had decided to pull a Love Actually. You know the scene. I made my large cards declaring my love for Harley, and my friends agreed to show up and, sing quiet Christmas carols while I showed the cards to Harley. And we pulled it off. After I was out of cards, Harley and I embraced and my friends went home. And in my head, I thought, finally. Wrong. Shortly after that, one of my friends, he just directly asked me what was going on between me and Harley. I told him that we didn't have a label for ourselves, but that things were going pretty well. He got on his phone and asked if I was actually sure about that. And when I said that I was, he handed me his phone, which had a photo from Facebook on it. The photo had been taken a couple of nights beforehand, and it was Harley kissing another guy. And I went into instant denial, but when I asked Harley about the other dude, she told me that they were actually together. And I was crushed. And she would eventually marry him. For the next couple of years, I just found myself in this horrible routine of developing close relationships with women. And then as soon as I would tell myself that this time it would be different, I would brave asking the question of going on a date. It ended the same every time. They would deny me and tell me the bullshit of I just value our friendship too much. If there was a face for the friend zone, it would be mine. I spent years being the relationship buffer for way too many women. We would do all of the date things, dinners, movies, concerts, nights out, or night outs, dancing, drinking. We had deep conversations, and I even did this whole 80s theme night with one of my friends, and she asked me to help her bedazzle her shoes. But I was always denied the chance of a relationship, and all of the women that I let myself have feelings for found lasting and meaningful relationships afterwards. 13 years of that. Every woman that I have ever had feelings for and spent time with where I thought we could be something have all found relationships after their time with me. I can't tell you how many times I've heard all of the normal sayings, you're such a great guy. Any woman would be lucky to be with you. I just don't want to ruin our friendship. I could see myself with someone like you. My daughter has asked me a few times over the last year if I've got trust issues. I don't shy away from the question. In fact, I'm very blunt about it. Yeah, I have crippling trust issues. I just don't trust women. I've been working on that for some time now, but I know that allowing myself to trust women again is something that will probably be an exceedingly long process. The irony of raising a daughter and having these trust issues, it doesn't go by me. But there was one woman who I did start to allow myself to be completely vulnerable around because I could see a potential future with her, and nothing about her sent red flags. But I found myself not being able to pursue a real relationship because life threw me a massive curveball and I couldn't ask her to be a part of it. It would have been too selfish of me to ask, and it would have been too big of an ask. She eventually found someone shortly after our time together, and I am genuinely happy for her. She is the first woman that didn't make me feel temporary. She'll always be an example of the good that can come from learning to trust again. It's a slow process, but perhaps someday, if my daughter asks me about trust again, I'll be able to answer a little differently. Always processing. Always making sure that I put in the work to keep the mental health in check. Like everyone, I have my good days. I have those days where it all just seems to work. Things click, it's smooth, and I feel great. And then the tough days, the bad days come strolling back to remind me not to get comfortable. I can't speak for others, but I know that for myself, when the bad days come to visit, they make a pretty hefty impact. Sometimes that impact can actually be a good thing. My recent bad days really pissed me off. And I have to say that I'm grateful for that. These recent bad days help bring something into perspective that really hasn't set well with me. And now I just have to figure out my next steps. It's true what they say, you can't have one without the other. Obviously, you always want more of the good, but this time I'm very thankful for a couple of the bad days that I've recently had. They helped give me some clarity and they helped throw a little fuel on a fire that has been dying for several years. Life can be funny that way sometimes. Processing. So, what came into perspective recently? What pissed me off? I put myself out there, being honest and open as I tend to be. And I got the responses that I already figured I would get. I wasn't upset by that, but I had this flash of an image, doors being closed on me. And I kind of ignored the image for a second, and then as I sat there, the image came back, and this time it was like in a movie when the camera pulls away from the close up, slowly revealing the larger image, revealing the setting, the truths, and the twists. For me, the setting was this long hallway full of closed and locked doors. And me standing in front of a newly closed door. I immediately understood. This hallway was the sum of my life. All of those doors represent the one hypothetical that I've always said bothered me. And ironically, I have been trapped in a hallway built on nothing but that hypothetical. What if? It is no wonder that I find myself struggling so much when it comes to trying to build my self-esteem, when it comes to being confident. It's no wonder that I am so hard on myself when it comes to moving forward, moving on, and trusting, because I've spent so much time in a place that is built on rejection and fear. This hallway, it's a staging area of "you're not good enough." I feel like I've just been wandering this hall, staring at these doors and creating scenarios built upon what if and if only. It's no wonder that after all of these years, I still have crippling trust issues. All I've surrounded myself with are these goddamn closed doors, which have really been preventing me from really being able to grow. These doors mock me. I have struggled the most when it comes to subjects of companionship and love. I know that for those that know me the best, they've heard me state that I do not believe I have ever experienced true love. Yes, I was married, and yes, I believe that she had some kind of feelings for me, but I don't believe that she ever was in love with me. Love is supposed to be incorruptible. It is supposed to be true and unwavering. If I give in to the belief that she was in love with me, then I have to give in to the truth that love is corruptible. It is wavering, and it is full of lies. I already have plenty of trust issues. Topping them off with that kind of mentality would just be too much. But she's as close to experiencing love as I know. And unfortunately, that was a lifetime ago. And since we ended our time together, I mean, she's found love. She's moved on. She has her own family. And I continued to build my hallway. Every time that I put myself out there in the pursuit of finding companionship and love, I have been rejected. Closed doors. It's at a point now that I'm beginning to believe that I've lost my chance. I can feel the urge to give in to it, but then I see these walls and these doors. And I remember that this place exists because of thoughts like that. I live in a place of fear built on doubt and rejection. This place is wrong. This place is full of lies. And it's a prison, a subset to a hell that I've allowed to be created. It serves no other purpose than to be a mockery of a fantasy that should be reality. And I created it. I built it with every moment of self-doubt, every ill word I've spoken about myself, every time that I put myself out there and was rejected, and immediately told myself that's what I get. Every time I've hesitated from taking a step forward, I added a new piece to this place. I built it, and it pisses me off. but there is a silver lining. There is a sliver of positivity in the mix. It's a big piece, too. I just have to find the strength to lift it and use it. I have to work up the will to utilize it. This piece is a mindset. It's a weapon of action, just waiting for me to lift it and use it. I built this place, which means I can tear this motherfucker down. From the summer of 2011 to 2013, I was a mess. I was stuck in the spiral of alcohol and depression. There was one new development, though. I didn't really wish for death anymore. Don't get too excited. I replaced suicidal thoughts with a longing to just simply vanish. Stop existing. It didn't take long, though, before the suicidal thoughts returned, and there were plenty of times where I would be alone in the house, just standing in the kitchen and holding a knife. I wouldn't put the blade to my skin, but I would stare at the blade and imagine scenarios of me taking my own life. I'd be driving alone in my car, and I would just imagine driving off the side of the road, or to go down the canyon and just lay on the gas pedal and slam into a wall or a tree. I hated my life. The only thing that was keeping me going was my daughter. But I was convincing myself that she would be better off without me, and that I was just a giant failure anyways, so she wouldn't miss me if I were gone. All of these thoughts just kept building and weighing on me. It was crushing me, and every night that I went to bed, I imagined not waking up the next day. I hated that I had these thoughts, and I hated that I just couldn't get out of that spiral of mine. One night, after just an especially hard day, I was lying in bed, and I just knew that if I didn't seek help, I would not wake up the next day. Everything inside of me understood that very real truth. I had to make a choice. One was to embrace what I had longed for, and the other was to do what I had avoided to do for so many years. But I had made a promise, and that promise echoed in my mind. When I found out that I was going to be a dad, and when I found out that I was going to have a daughter, I promised that I would always be around. I wasn't about to break that promise. I grabbed my phone and I went online. I found a therapist and I ended up scheduling an appointment. And as soon as I got that confirmation email, I felt this crack in that spiral form. I knew that I could go to sleep that night and that I would wake up the next day. And a few days later, I went to my first session. I sat in that waiting room and filled out the paperwork. I felt awkward and afraid. And the doctor came, he grabbed my paperwork, and he took me to the office. He went over all of the logistical business side of things first, letting me know how much a session cost and how he ran his practice. He told me that the first session was free, and it was more of like a trial. He wanted me to be comfortable with him, and if I was and wanted to continue the sessions, then I could. But it was entirely up to me. I remember walking to that little couch in his office and I started to lie down. He stopped me, chuckled, and said, "This isn't like the movies. You can sit up. In fact, I'd prefer it if you did." It didn't it didn't take long into that session before I began just spilling my guts. It was shockingly easy to talk to the doctor. My session ended, and I told him that I would like to continue with him. We had a pretty tough talk at the end because he felt that I was close to being at risk. And instead of having me get checked into the hospital, he did agree to 2 sessions a week. And if I made progress, we would decrease the number of sessions. He knew that I had to work and that I had a child to support. And due to my work schedule, we had to set my appointments for early in the morning before I went to work. And every session was intense. My doctor didn't shy away from stuff, and up to that point in my life, I had never been so open about everything. But I was starting to feel better, and that just encouraged me to keep talking. After a couple of weeks, I told my doc that I was feeling great. I had been putting the work in that we would discuss, and it was working. The doc was happy to hear, and then he reminded me of something that he had told me on my first session. Therapy is not a cure. It's a tool to help learn new ways to process things as we go through life. He was happy to hear that I was feeling better and that I was taking his suggestions and doing the mental exercises that he was giving me. I had opted out of taking any medications for my depression. I told him that I had a slight addictive personality and that I had been dependent on alcohol for too long. I didn't want to take anything. If I was going to get my life back on track, I felt like I needed to do it unmedicated. And within a couple of months, I no longer felt dependent on alcohol. In fact, my consumption drastically changed. I was down to just a couple of beers once a week or two, and I didn't drink to numb anything. And my body took advantage of that sudden change. I lost almost all of my tolerance, and I went from being able to drink until the sun came up, which I did a couple of times, and watching the sunrise while I was still tipping a bottle back, it just made me like a massive piece of shit. But I went from that to only being able to drink maybe 3 beers. Eventually, my tolerance would mellow out, and I would go out to a local brewery with some of my closest friends, and I would be able to have like a flight or maybe one full pint. It just depended on how much food I ate. And to this day, I really only drink when I'm recording on the podcast. Or every now and again, I'll treat myself to a late lunch and have a beer with it. But drinking lost its control over me. And that change was one of the best that came out of my therapy. My sessions were lowered to once a week with a text message or a phone call just to check in. My sessions were early in the week, so I had to check in with him towards the end of the week, let him know how I was doing. But I stuck with the work that I needed to accomplish, and I followed through with what we talked about. I was determined to not let depression be the thing that took me out. There was a lot that came out during those sessions. It was a lot like what you've been listening to. And one of the things that really came out was where my depression and lack of identity came from. Being so young when I made the conscious decision to abandon a large piece of identity that was a major fact in my family and deciding not to trust anyone around me, it had to stem from somewhere. And it did. My parents basically raised my brother and I as only children. There's 9 years between us, which means that when my brother moved to Minnesota, I was only 9 years old. And the years that I had with him before he moved away, I didn't really spend with him. He had his own life to live, and he was active. We had a relationship, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't one of those where we were super, super close. We didn't really get close until after I was a little older and Sarah had come into my life. And my parents raised him a certain way. They had some rough years before I came along, and even for a bit after I arrived. But the mistakes that they had made when raising him made them feel like they needed to make up some ground with me, at least to a degree. There were some things that they overcompensated for, and some things that just didn't change at all. My dad, he worked all the time, and when he wasn't working, he was trying to get some rest. But his work schedule and his routine of having to put in the hours so that his family could eat, it was a factor in why he and I did not have a great relationship for many years. I understand why he had to work so much. And as a father myself, I know how easy it is to get caught up in having to work yourself to the point of exhaustion just to make sure that your child can eat. The time that I spent with my mom was typically spent listening to her unload her problems onto me. I would listen to everything that made her feel negatively about herself. And I learned how easy it is for rejection to get its grip on someone and never let go. We didn't have a strong family unit when I was young. I say that things could have been different had I just spoken up. And I stand by that, but I fear that had I spoken up during certain times in my youth, my parents would have reacted out of desperation. They may have kicked the need to go to church into overdrive. I'm sure that I would have been forced to attend every service possible, but in the middle of every, be in the middle of every prayer circle, and that they would have felt rejected by me, which in turn could have made them reject me. And the consequences of that could have been absolutely catastrophic. I would have reacted out of desperate and angry rebellion and potentially would have experienced what I feared most in the first place. It was, and it still remains, a scary hypothetical situation for me. My parents raised my brother and I the best that they could with what they had at the time. And the unfortunate thing about it is that what they had was not a lot. And the influence they had was not a strong and positive one. The leadership they learned from was a compromised one. And my parents were a product of that environment. I learned that my trauma was essentially my own doing. But it came from the environment that I was in. No child should feel like they have to abandon trust and identity to fit a narrative of the world around them. Making that decision sent me on an exceedingly difficult path, and it had conditioned my perspective in such a deep and negative way that stepping away from it was going to be similar to addicts getting sober. The doc challenged me a lot. There was one day that we were concluding our session, and he told me that he wanted me to test my observation skills. He told me, just smile, especially when I was around people. He said, even if you have to fake the smile at first, just smile and watch the people around you. And then more importantly, observe what it does for you. I went to work and I met his challenge. I just smiled. And I had people coming up to me the entire day telling me that I looked good, that something was different about me. I observed my coworkers and I realized that the more people I was around, the more smiles that I saw, which in turn made me smile more. I started out with this fake smile, but it hadn't taken long for it to become genuine. At the following session, the doc asked me about his smile challenge. I told him everything that I saw and everything that I felt that day. He laughed and he said, I know, smiles are infectious. The whole point of therapy isn't to cure you, it's to help give you guidance and help change your perception a little bit. And there was a lot of healing, and my perceptions were shifted drastically. The more that I opened up, the more I believed I was on the right track. Therapy was one of the greatest decisions, if not the greatest decision I've ever made for myself. It started off as a desperate cry for help, but over time, and to this day, I believe that therapy is perhaps the best way to show that you believe in yourself. I view therapy as an investment into yourself. It was the first time that I ever actually felt like I was genuinely worth a damn, and it was amazing. There was a very real ripple effect that came from my therapy sessions. My friendships grew stronger. I started to perform better at my job, and I was able to make new friends. And my relationship with my parents, it grew closer. And my relationship with Sarah was smoothing over. But more importantly, my relationship with my daughter drastically changed. Kids are crazy perceptive. Sorry. Before therapy, my weekends with Jovi always started off rough. I would arrive at Sarah's place to pick Jovi up, and we would spend the next 20 minutes to an hour of trying to get Jovi out of the house. She didn't want to go with me. She knew that I was such a mess and in such a dark mental state that it bothered her. Jovi was always safe. Always. But this was the updated version of all those nights that neither of us could sleep. I was so far from having peace of mind that it affected her. And every time she cried, screamed, and refused to leave Sarah's, it broke me. I could see the debate on Sarah's face. I knew that she was weighing the option of telling me that it just wasn't going to happen. I knew she was thinking about telling me that I wouldn't get to be with my daughter. But she never told me that. We would finally get Jovi in my car, and within 10 minutes, give or take, Jovi would be calm, and we would be on our way to go and enjoy our weekend. We went from our weekends being high stress and Jovi having separation issues from her mom and crying and screaming about it for hours to no issues. Jovi and I were able to start to actually get our father-daughter relationship on a path of well-being. We grew closer, and there were so many times, even the tough ones, because kids don't make things easy, where I just felt blessed that I was a part of my daughter's life. I still feel that way. I promised my daughter when she was still growing inside her mom that I was always going to be around. And once I felt that positive shift in my life during my time in therapy, I had never been happier about being a complete failure when it came to suicide. I walked into my appointment one morning and I took my seat. My doctor grabbed his notebook and he pulled out his pen. Today is going to be a tough one, Dustin. You see, up to that point, with as open as I had been about pretty much everything, I had shied away from talking about Sarah. I just simply didn't want to, because talking about her, talking about us when we were together, was just too much for me. When my doc told me that morning that it was going to be a tough one, I knew exactly what he was going to say next. I know you don't want to, but we're talking about Sarah today. I hadn't cried that hard up to that point in any of my sessions, but I got it all out. And once the doc got me to start talking, he just sat back and let me do what I always do when I start letting things out. I word vomited all over the place. Obviously, I'm not going to go into many details about my private therapy sessions, but I can say that it was a brutal hour. And when I left for work afterwards, I felt like a massive weight had fallen off my back. And I was exhausted. He didn't challenge me to do what I did that night. I just felt compelled to do it. I wrote Sarah a letter. It was basically a long apology, and I took accountability for the mistakes that I had made while we were together. I talked about that first shot of whiskey that had been the push that sent us on that downward spiral. I told her that I didn't hate her, but still loved her. It wasn't romantic love anymore. But love, because she had been, still was, and would continue to be a big part of my life, whether we were together or not. I gave her the letter at a coffee shop, and I figured we would just enjoy a coffee together and she could read the letter later. But she read it right there at the table. She mistook it, or at least some of it, thinking that I was trying to get back with her. And I assured her that the letter wasn't that at all. I just wanted to do what I should have done a long time ago. I just wanted to say I was sorry. I had to bring my therapy sessions to an end, though, because it was expensive and it wasn't covered by my insurance at the time. We revisited a few things that we had talked about previously, and I talked about what I was looking forward to in the days to come. I didn't focus on big picture stuff for myself. I focused on what I had ahead of me day to day. He told me something that he had said a few times in our time together, and he wanted to reiterate it because it needs to be consistently. He told me to remember that good days also come with bad. Bad days are going to happen. What matters about them is how we process those days. Do we allow them to control, or do we take a deep breath and try to understand why the bad day is happening? He also told me that feeling angry, sad, frustrated is okay. We shouldn't shy away from feeling those kinds of emotions. They're natural. What matters is how we process them. Those words have always stuck with me. It's not every day you hear someone tell you that it's okay to have a bad day and to be angry, to be sad. In fact, it's healthy, and it's healthy to discuss those feelings and those days. As long as we don't allow them to control us, we should expose those feelings because it helps to process them. Getting the words and the feelings out, it tends to help us have a better understanding of them. I started an exercise around that time that I still do to this day, although there are plenty of times where I get tripped up and I don't really succeed, but mistakes happen. So I move on. When I have a burst of negativity, whatever it is, I give it a window. I allow myself to sit in that feeling, scream, curse, rant, whatever. But I only allow myself to be in it for a short time. Once that time ends and that window closes, I have to hold myself accountable and I have to take my control back. It's helped me a ton over the years, even the times that I don't do such a good job at closing that window. Everyone should know the Cherokee tale of the two wolves. I had never heard it until I was in therapy, and it's one that means a great deal to me, and I've utilized its lessons for years now. An old Cherokee is teaching his grandson about life. "A fight is going on inside of me," he said to the boy. "It is a terrible fight, and it is between two wolves. One is evil. He is anger, envy, sorrow, greed, regret, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego." He continued. "The other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside you and inside every other person too." The grandson thought about it for a minute and then he asked his grandfather, "Which wolf will win?" And the old Cherokee simply replied, "If you feed them right, they both win." And the story goes on. You see, if I only choose to feed the white wolf, the black one will be hiding around every corner, waiting for me to become distracted or weak and jump to get the attention he craves. He will always be angry and will always fight the white wolf. But if I acknowledge him, he is happy and the white wolf is happy and we all win. For the black wolf has many qualities: tenacity, courage, fearlessness, strong-willed, and great strategic thinking that I have need of at times. These are the very things the white wolf lacks. But the white wolf has compassion, caring, strength, and the ability to recognize what is in the best interest of all. You see, son, the white wolf needs the black wolf at his side. To feed only one would starve the other, and they will become uncontrollable. To feed and care for both means they will serve you well and do nothing that is not a part of something greater, something good, something of life. Feed them both, and there will be no more internal struggle for your attention. And when there is no battle inside, you can listen to the voices of deeper knowledge that will guide you in choosing what is right in every circumstance. Peace, my son, is the Cherokee mission in life. A man or a woman who has peace inside has everything. A man or a woman who is pulled apart by the war inside him or her has nothing. How you choose to interact with the opposing forces within you will determine your life. Starve one or guide them both. Post-therapy, I hit a good stride. Sure, I had my bad days, just like the good old doc told me that I would, but their weight, it was easier to carry. My depression felt like it was in check, and I didn't try to stuff it all down inside and ignore it anymore. I took control back and made the decision that instead of trying to date again, I needed to focus on two things. One, being myself and making sure that I had sustainability on my mental health, and that I was getting the pieces of my life put together. I was in a good place, but there was still a lot of work to be done. The other thing that I wanted to focus on more than anything else was just being a dad. Therapy had helped bring us closer together, and I knew that it was vital that we maintain that. Don't get me wrong, life is never perfect, and it's never always pretty. Jovi and I have had moments which I like to call doozies. Conversation became my main tool when it comes to parenting. Jovi and I talk about a lot, and I'm very upfront and honest about a lot of stuff with her. I have been since she was young. When she has misbehaved, she's gotten herself in trouble, we talk about it. We discuss the situation, the behavior, and how we can improve it. And after every argument, every disciplinary action, the loss of toys, video games, screen time, what have you, I made it a point to remind her that I loved her and that when she made a mistake that got her in trouble, it never changed that love. As Jovi got older, some of our arguments have increased in volume because we have both just gotten caught up in the heat of the moment. Or like I've been reminded of so many times during my life, unresolved issues that we haven't dealt with have actually affected some of our not so fine moments. When our volumes just start competing, or if we are just too frustrated to resolve the issue, we will take a break. She will go into her room, and I will go into mine. We will sit away from one another for a few minutes before coming back and calmly discussing the issue. We don't always do this well, but we try. My relationship with my daughter wasn't the only one that really strengthened after my therapy. My parents and I seemed to hit this new level, and we became closer than we had ever been before. I loved it. I was actually seeing the ripple effects from my decision to get help. I got along better with my coworkers. My friends and I became closer, and I was able to make new friends, and I didn't feel the need to put on a disguise anymore. And one of my favorite ripple effects was that I didn't feel dependent on alcohol. In fact, I stopped feeling the need for it at all. Sure, I would still allow myself a beer or two here and there, but it would take me forever just to finish one beer. I went from being the guy who could do 3 or 4 shots on top of 3 or 4 beers in about a half hour to the guy who would nurse a beer for over an hour. It would usually be warmed up by the time I would finish it. I didn't care. It felt good to not feel the push to consume as much as possible. There were lots of times where I would be with my group of friends and I would just take a moment to quietly appreciate them and the moments themselves. It would be we would be having a game night or going out to dinner or dinner at someone's place or going to a movie as a large group. And I would just smile because every laugh, every conversation was confirmation that my life was worth the investment. For a while, that group of friends of mine leaned heavy into our little unit, and we called ourselves the panel. There were 7 of us, and we all talked almost every day. If we didn't actually have conversations, we would aim to make each other laugh and cringe as hard as possible. To this day, it's the only mass text that I've ever enjoyed. Our group was awesome, and I feel honored to be able to say that for a time, I was a part of that kind of group. Every time that I would get to see my daughter learn something new or be silly, I would, and I still do, feel that nudge of hindsight of what I would have missed. I will also shake my head because I feel like had I just opened up to those closest to me back when I first started to spiral, I possibly would have enjoyed even more conversations, laughs, and silly moments. But since I missed all of those back then, I tell myself to really appreciate the ones that I get to be a part of now. Therapy, it shouldn't be taboo. It shouldn't be feared or mocked. I am a firm believer that everyone in this life needs to go to therapy. Whether you feel like you need it or not, everyone needs their perspectives altered a little bit. I know I certainly did. I said it before, and I've said it ever since I was in therapy. I'll always say it. But therapy is an investment in yourself. What greater compliment to your life is there? We all strive to be stronger in who we are. Therapy is just the healthiest way of doing that. It was a much needed change in my life. And up to that point, I had never felt better or more confident in who I was. When I was in therapy, my doctor told me to imagine life as an amusement park ride, preferably a roller coaster. There are twists and turns, some smooth and calm moments, and there are times where you rise to incredible heights, and those rises are followed by intense and fast drops. And it does this over and over again until the ride ends. My roller coaster, once I concluded my therapy, it became a pretty calm ride. Sure, it still had some curvy moments, but it hadn't been too bad, and I had been on a gentle and subtle rise for a few years. I had embraced a new positive outlook on life. I adopted the title of recovering pessimist because pessimism is easy, but it never actually helps anything. I didn't want to be that way anymore, and I was doing a really good job at not allowing excessive negativity to run in my mind. I felt great, and I kept telling myself that I must have pulled off real change because things, for the most part, were going really well for me. I got comfortable, and I let my guard down.